The light that illuminates the world begins in Los Angeles, begins in darkness, begins in the mountains, begins in empty landscapes, in doubt and remorse. San Antonio Peak throws shadows upon a city of shadows. There are hints of human insignificance, there are nightmares. But just at the moment of intolerability, there's an eruption of spectra. It's morning in the east. Morning is hopeful, uncomplicated, and it scales the mountaintops as it scales all things. The light comes from nowhere fathomable, from an apparently eternal reservoir of emanations, radioactivities.
1, 2, 3. I don't need another sunrise painted in the colors of your pretty lies, 'cause I've got something pure and true, something I can see right through. Hold the grenadine and orange shoes. Tonight there's only tears. I'm gonna leave that worm behind. Just wouldn't tell it to me straight, so I'm gonna take it straight this time. There'll be tears in my tequila, just tears in my tequila, only tears in my tequila tonight.
You are, in fact, interested in music, and you've been performing music since you were very young. Can you tell us something about that?
Well, I took piano as a young person. Everyone in my family played instruments and sang, so music was very part of the household. My mother's quite a good pianist. My sister sang a lot. So it was always around, the radio was always on, the record player was always on. I started writing songs when I was 17, I guess, in college, and I had a few bands in college and so forth. I never will be a good player. I'm just not, I haven't spent enough time on it, and I can't spend enough time on it. But I love what music does, and I do think it gets you somewhere. I mean, there's a reason that the archangels are always singing in heaven, you know, because that's something that talking doesn't do for you, you know. So it's an analog to what I try to do as a writer. I mean, I think literary writing can have a musical element and should have a musical element. And so I think when I play, I have to listen better. I have to listen to the other players. And that makes me better equipped to go back and write good sentences. Light edging over the mountaintop and across the lakes of the highlands. Light across the Angeles National Forest. Light rushing across skeins of smog in the California skies. Light on Redlands, light on the planned communities, light on the guy tossing the morning newspaper from a Toyota with 193,000 miles on it. Light on the Santa Ana River, on a drunk sleeping tenderly beside its dregs. Light on the Santa Ana Mountains, the San Bernardino Mountains. Light on the Prado Basin, where a stabbing victim welters in her wounds. Light on East Los Angeles, on gangsters who haven't slept yet. Light upon the unvisited downtown expanses of Los Angeles. An empty city bus idles at a red light. Light on the La Brea tar pits, on the Pleistocene and Holocene residents of the city. Light on the system of viaducts coming down from the mountains, from the trickle of the Colorado River. Light on the faint traces of the San Andreas Fault. Light on the cracked and empty sidewalks. Light moving faster now, or apparently faster. The magic hour of dawn on the tanning salon faces coming out of endless parties from the night before.
So actually, music is helpful for you as a writer as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think writers should listen. The prose shouldn't just be words on a page. That's not what it is. I mean, language is musical by its nature. There's a sound to it. So I think writers should think about how the prose sounds.
Do you listen to particular music when writing?
I have. Purple America, a lot of Purple America was written exclusively to Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan, for example. And there are certain records like that. Plastic Ono Band by John Lennon that get played again and again because they're really good at getting me to a particular emotional spot when I'm working.
I see. And to what extent is are the lyrics that you write for the songs you perform a sort of a logical component of your being a writer? What's the relationship between that kind of lyrics and the work you do as a writer?
Well, lyrics are really different from writing prose fiction, for example, and I try to serve the song. And in the context of playing in this band and playing with other people, what I'm not interested in is being a show-offy lyricist or grandstanding in any way. I just want to be part of the band. So I do whatever they want me to do. And the others are quite good editors of lyrics, and I accept the editing willingly.
Okay, yeah, let's try that. Then I saw you walking toward her, and I had to change my order. Just a bottle and a shot glass on the side will do me fine. There'll be tears in my tequila. I don't need no sober line. You just wouldn't tell it to me straight, so I'm gonna take it straight this time. There'll be tears in my tequila.
Okay. Wait, where is he? Oh, can I have like a little more guitar? I'm sorry.
Tears in my tequila tonight. I don't need another sunrise painted in the colors of your pretty lies, 'cause I got something pure and true, something I can see right through. Oh, the grenadine, the orange shoes. Tonight there's only tears. I'm gonna leave that worm behind. He just wouldn't tell it to me straight, so I'm gonna take it straight this time. There'll be tears in my tequila, just tears in my tequila, only tears in my tequila tonight.
Light upon the freeways, light upon tinted windows, light upon limousines. Even the backlots are perfect with it. Cinematographers everywhere are awakened as if light calls upon them to rise. Light surging toward the beaches now, toward the great and somnolent ocean. Light upon lovers, light upon Manhattan Beach, light upon Hermosa Beach. Light upon a pair of punk rock kids in leather pants smoking weed beneath the pier at Redondo Beach. Light upon the waves, faster now, or so it seems. Light upon sleeping lovers on a beach, light upon the strayed dogs and jackrabbits and condors and Mediterranean fruit flies nestling in the valleys. Light upon all Los Angeles, and then light beyond Los Angeles, until the city is a memory receding in the progress of morning, just a layer of auburn air and music pulsing from a dream. Light over surfers bobbing on the waves, light over the Channel Islands, and then light in the immensity of the sea, giving up the comfort of the coast.
The the first section in your latest book, The Diviners, is called Opening Credits and Theme Music. Now, of course, there's an obvious reference to the entertainment industry, which is a major subject in the book. But to what extent is this also maybe the result of your musical aspirations and your aspirations as a writer meeting each other?
Yeah, well, I think all the big openings in the last couple of books, the beginning of Purple America, there's kind of a similar ambitious section at the beginning of the book, The Black Veil, which hasn't come out in Dutch yet, but they all have that kind of musical ambition. And I think it's just because when I was a reader in my teens and 20s, I loved big openings. You know, I just love that kind of cinematic, gigantic worldview that you would get in, like, the beginning of Bleak House, for example, is a really
Dickens, with the mist and everything.
Yeah, the fog in London, yeah,
yes.
Just beautiful, you know. So I love those kinds of openings. And in this book, the opening was really meant to be self-consciously cinematic in that I was aping the movement of a credit sequence in Hitchcock's film Psycho, which starts with a helicopter coming down through Phoenix, and it kind of flies around the city as the credits go, and then it comes in the window of this hotel. It's actually a really beautiful shot because the camera seems to go like through the window of the hotel into the room somehow, where it then finds Janet Leigh in her black brassiere. So I was trying to do the same thing, only even more so, by following this dawn all the way around the globe. He is Randall Tork, the greatest wine writer in history. He is the writer of innumerable wine articles and wine books, and the author of an eponymously named franchise of annual wine collecting guides, the Randall Tork Guide for Discerning Collectors. He is a popularizer of such terms as barnyard and gymnasium when used in the description of fine wines. He is the man who made the Battenkill Vineyard what it is. He created its reputation. No one else did it, though many stake their claim. He's the one who destroyed a popular sommelier at one of the French restaurants by spreading the rumor that this so-called professional had no sense of smell. He did it with glee. He cares nothing about his subjects, the vintners, nor about their feelings, not about their multi-million-dollar investments. They are the enemies of true invention.
What were you trying to achieve in writing this novel, which, apart from other things, I would think is also a satire on the entertainment industry? Yeah,
I have some problem with the word satire as it's used in critical discourse, because I think it often means heartlessness, and I think the book's pretty passionate about the characters, but it's very comic and was meant to be comic. And it does skewer the entertainment industry, which is easy to do. I mean, they're easy targets. It's not hard. I guess after The Black Veil, I wanted to write something that was far less cerebral and far less sort of drenched in literary critical discourse. And so I decided to sort of poke fun at the most obvious mark in American culture, which is the television industry, really. And that afforded me a number of opportunities, chief among them to structure the book sort of like a television series. As far as the diviners themselves go, it's a handy religious metaphor, because in English, diviner means the guy with the forked stick, but it also has the linguistic root of divinity, you know, meaning God. So that seems very American to me, because it's mystical and religious, and it's also completely fraudulent, you know, which is a lot like the television business, I think.
1, 2, 3. The tourists take cabs up the hill. They watch us like ghosts in the night. The sister sends money back home. I save for a room of my own, with a shower and heat.
What he despises. the delusions of wine connoisseurs, how they actually believe they can taste all those faint traces, tobacco and chocolate and toasted almond, how they defer to whatever costs the most and is most prized by the heirs and heiresses who haven't spent a sober afternoon in 45 years. The look in the eyes of the wine collectors at the word Bordeaux makes Randall Tork want to drive forks into these eyes. And when he encounters these people at wine tastings, he invariably selects the best wine at random and then argues for the perfection of the vintage, saying that the rest of the region tastes like it had formaldehyde in it, and then he adheres to this result unswervingly. He wrote the column that is whispered about by every informed collector, the remarks in which he compared the entire run of 1997 California Chardonnays to the actress Elke Murnau. Who could forget?
Well, I mean, I sort of was schooled in the great modernist tradition and really in the European tradition of 20th century fiction. That's always what I liked. So Joyce, Proust, Beckett, Thomas Bernhard, that whole axis of storytelling that has as much emphasis on the language as it does on you know, the incidents, the stories. I just like that kind of work. It's what interests me. It's very musical, you know, and so I'm just trying to contribute something to the axis of literature that I grew up reading and loving, you know. It's of note as an American writer, because the American tradition runs entirely in the opposite direction, you know, the so-called degree zero style that Roland Barthes talks about, for example, as being paradoxical and contradictory, nonetheless holds sway entirely in American fiction. You know, it's really from Huckleberry Finn to Ernest Hemingway to Raymond Carver to Richard Ford. It's all about paring away as much stylistic language as you can, you know. So what I do in America looks entirely different than it looks in Europe. It looks quite a bit more flamboyant, I think, than it would here. But as I say, I'm just coming by it naturally because it's just what I like to read. These wines are flabby in the way the cellulite bulges from the too tight pouches of her nulliparous behind. They are fruity like the desserts that are favored by the disadvantaged children that Murnau and her never-to-be-mentioned partner take into their house so that she can be photographed leering like a wine taster surrounded by her brood on the covers of celebrity weeklies. These Chardonnays have the mouthfeel of neglected vaginas begging beseechingly to be brought beseechingly out of retirement, musty, undeodorized, and sentimental. They have the aftertaste of excessive reuse of Lysol spray in the bovine bathrooms of salacious celebrities who are otherwise lax about germs, and they are garish like appalling Broadway productions, the casts of which are full of malnourished thespians who would do anything for a plug from her flatulent fabulousness.
Death is only a dream.
Yes, that's it.
Sadly we sing and we tremulous fret as we stand at the mystical stream. There's a valley near by the dark river of death, and yet it's no more than a dream. Only a dream, only a dream, and glory beyond the dark stream. How peaceful the slumber, how happy the waking, for death is only a dream.
Now you're using the word fraudulent. Actually, this book is situated between the day after the 2000 presidential elections in the United States and the moment that I think some Supreme Court or whatever in Florida is deciding that the elections have been won by George W. Bush. So during a very tricky period in American history, one might even say a very fraudulent period in American history, at least from a democratic point of view, could be called that. I'm quite sure that that is very intentional.
Absolutely. I mean, originally I was going to have the book run from Election Day to September 10th, 2001. And the problem was that I wrote 300 pages and only 4 days had passed. So I, instead of writing a 15,000 page novel, I sort of focused in the story on the month that you're talking about, or the 6 weeks. But it was a fascinating moment in American history and American politics because it's a real interregnum. It's a moment between presidencies, essentially. And it indicates the rickety, unstable footing on which the Bush presidency rests, because he wasn't really legitimately elected, I don't think. And so that period prior to 9/11 of the Bush presidency, I think, if we look back on it, if we reflect on it, has all these uncertainties attached to it, all this ambiguity, all this confusion about who we were, where we were in the moments prior to the World Trade Center collapsing and so forth. The Clinton presidency was noted for its wildness and the internet boom and having sex with interns, and the Bush presidency is noted for an almost totalitarian level of control over media and the country and so forth. But that spot in between is much fuzzier and more interesting to me.
Now you're using the word fraudulent. Actually, this book is situated between the day after the 2000 presidential elections in the United States and the moment that I think some Supreme Court or whatever in Florida is deciding that the elections have been won by George W. Bush. So during a very tricky period in American history, one might even say a very fraudulent period in American history, at least from a democratic point of view, could be called that. I'm quite sure that that is very intentional.
Absolutely. I mean, originally I was going to have the book run from Election Day to September 10th, 2001. And the problem was that I wrote 300 pages and only 4 days had passed. So I, instead of writing a 15,000 page novel, I sort of focused in the story on the month that you're talking about, or the 6 weeks. But it was a fascinating moment in American history and American politics because it's a real interregnum. It's a moment between presidencies, essentially. And it indicates the rickety, unstable footing on which the Bush presidency rests, because he wasn't really legitimately elected, I don't think. And so that period prior to 9/11 of the Bush presidency, I think, if we look back on it, if we reflect on it, has all these uncertainties attached to it, all this ambiguity, all this confusion about who we were, where we were in the moments prior to the World Trade Center collapsing and so forth. The Clinton presidency was noted for its wildness and the internet boom and having sex with interns, and the Bush presidency is noted for an almost totalitarian level of control over media and the country and so forth. But that spot in between is much fuzzier and more interesting to me.
So apart from moral statements, do you want to make a political statement with this book?
Well, I'm always working with politics. It's always in the backdrop. I mean, in the ice storm, the Watergate situation was hovering behind it. In Purple America, you know, American nuclear politics was in the backdrop of the book. I like to create opportunities for people to emerge such that they seem like there's a trickling down from the political realm into their psychological and emotional lives. I think there's a sort of a critical phrase, phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny, which means that the life of the individual always lives through the life of the race, is always lived through the life of the race, you know, so that's how the characters operate in my books.
She looks like she's had a few drinks. She looks like she's watched the sunrise. She wouldn't dance for a boyo. She doesn't need drywall and paint. No, the naked goth girl. The naked goth girl. Naked goth girl. Naked goth girl. I throw dice with a Cuban. His hands are swollen and scarred. Says he's had girls by the hundreds, a mansion with servants and cars before the Castro regime. The Castro regime. The Castro regime.
Can you explain me about your views on communication, the way it's been evoked in your work, but also your whole philosophy about the concept of communication?
Well, I think the sort of backstory is that I, as an undergraduate at university, I studied critical theory, French continental philosophy, you know, Derrida and Foucault and Saussure and all those kinds of people. And that whole way of thinking about epistemology, about language and knowledge, supports the idea that the sign system of language fails at a certain sort of percentage of its utterances. You know, it's never going to be perfect. Right now it's not perfect. I'm not really saying what it is I want to say. I'm failing. In fact, I always feel in interviews like I'm failing a little bit. But that's sort of the intellectual background that I come from. As far as the kind of culture that I grew up in, this sort of northeastern WASP culture of the United States is all about never saying what it is you really need to say and doing it through indirection. For example, there's a great John Cheever story, one of the last John Cheever stories, called The Jewels of the Cabots. And in that story, every time the story's about to get to the really important dramatic emotional material, the narrator says, "Feel that refreshing breeze," and then completely changes the subject. And that is exactly the kind of milieu that I grew up in, this world where to figure out what was really going on, you had to constantly interpret down through layers of indirection and politeness and so forth. So having those two different sets of origins, an intellectual set and an emotional set, I came to want to be a writer, which is a strangely odd career choice for someone who doesn't believe that communication is terribly effective, you know. So I think all this language that you're seeing in what I do is about trying to fling so much paint on the canvas of communication and hope that some of it sticks, despite the incredible difficulty of people really talking openly about what it is they need to communicate.